Greetings, system failure listeners. Nate here in the state of Maine, Brian over there in the state of Rhode Island. What's good on this beautiful Sunday morning in July, Brian?
Greetings. Not too much going on down here in Rhode Island this week.
Well, oftentimes I wonder, there are some weeks when we're getting ready for the podcast and I wonder what the hell we're going to talk about when topics are thin, but this is not one of those weeks. The news has been completely crazy from the time we hung up the cans last Sunday when I had just driven north from New Jersey and was in a state of exhaustion. And so I guess we should just jump right into it, Brian. As you are aware, we've got some pretty important senators dropping like flies here stateside in America. We had our man Mitch McConnell, really one of the more loathsome politicians ever to set foot in the halls of the U.S. Congress, has been in the hospital these past 3 weeks. The rumors are the man might be brain dead. And he might, or somehow he's at the end of his rope, but his wife departed for China 2 days after he went in the hospital, and she's got the power of attorney over him. And so I'm just wondering, the speculation is that something might be really wrong with Mitch McConnell, and they don't want to have this woman in the United States where she can, where she maybe has to pull the plug on him or something like that. The intrigue here is that McConnell, had announced that he is retiring at the end of his term. So I think Kentucky just passed rules saying that there has to be a special runoff election and the governor doesn't just get to appoint a replacement. So I expect they'll probably try to keep the McConnell seat vacant through the end of the year when he was going to be retiring anyway and someone else was going to take his place. But then we woke up this morning, Sunday, July the 12th, to the news that maybe the second most loathsome senator, Lindsey Graham, had died. I think Graham is about 10 years younger than McConnell, so this was unexpected. I guess the guy had a heart attack in his Washington, D.C. townhouse last night, and that's the end of the line for Lindsey Graham, I believe age 72, if my memory serves. This is one of those guys who's obviously gay, but he makes his career as an anti-gay crusader in the Congress as a senator from the state of South Carolina. I think the other funny trivia piece about Lindsey Graham is that he had size 5 feet, tiny little feet. And so, yeah, we've got two big name Republican senators down for the count, either dead or approaching death's door. So that's very interesting. I don't know if it necessarily really changes the calculus. The Republicans have been enjoying a 52-seat majority to 48 in the, or maybe it was 53 to 47. I think that's right in the Senate. Neither of these casualties are likely to affect that balance of power, but it will mean that the Republicans are going to have. They have to have every single Republican in lockstep with each other. They're just going to make it harder for the Republicans to pass legislation. So maybe that's a good thing. But man, was it Mark Twain? I think it might have been Clarence Darrow, not Mark Twain, who said that, well, I've never wished a man dead. I have read certain obituaries with great relish. So that's the vibe this morning, Brian.
Well, regarding Mitch McConnell, I don't know. There's this idea on the internet that they are not pronouncing him dead to stop Thomas Massey from running in some kind of special election. I don't know how likely that is. I mean, it's you always hope that there's going to be some kind of victory for the people, maybe Obama gets elected, passes healthcare and stops the endless wars or something. And then it always turns out to be a big disappointment. Or you would hope that Thomas Massey would not lose to millions of Zionist dollars coming into Kentucky, and that he would overcome the forces of darkness, and that just ends up a huge disappointment. Or Donald Trump tells you that he's gonna no more foreign wars and not keep expanding the defense budget or whatever, and that turns out to be a huge disappointment. And also that he'll release the Epstein files and a myriad of other things. So I don't know how much it matters how many seats the Republicans have versus the Democrats, but I can tell you one thing, that if my spouse was on life support, you can be sure I too would cross the Pacific and hang out in China until they finally kick off.
Yeah, that's just what one does. Right? It just comes naturally. Yeah, it certainly is bizarre. So yeah, I don't know. I do wish it would upset the balance of power in the Senate. That was my first thoughts. Ooh, maybe we can, move on to the phase where we have some kind of a blue wave, and the mass impeachments of the Donalds can begin, and maybe we can keep this man from launching more insane foreign wars. I worry particularly about the island nation of Cuba, with their nominally communist government, which seems like it was maybe, or like it seemed like the Donald had great success with the whatever coup he pulled off in Venezuela, and that made him drunk with power decide to like listen to the warmongers like the Lindsey Grahams and the Mitch McConnells. Lindsey Graham, of course, a major proponent of this action in Iran, and proceed with a ill-advised invasion of a country that's just not like Venezuela, like a much more serious country in terms of their ability to defend themselves. And just like the rumors were swirling that Trump wanted to move on Cuba as well. Obviously, the coup in Venezuela means that the Cubans can no longer avail themselves of Venezuelan oil, which is causing major problems. They can't generate power. There's rolling blackouts on the island. It's a major threat for people who are in hospital and require, rely on the electricity to keep them alive through one medical contrivance or another. Maybe the silver lining here is that with the disaster that is the Iran war, which seems to be picking back up again over this past week, that maybe we can at least avoid another aggressive, unnecessary war on the taxpayer's dime vis-a-vis Cuba. So let's stay hopeful on that front. Maybe, even if we're not going to get a shakeup in the Senate, at least this is, interesting from senseless warmongering. If you're rooting against senseless warmongering, maybe there's a little bit of glimmer of hope here.
I think that this Venezuelan setting the Donald up to go to war with Iran narrative. I don't know. I guess maybe I'm just feeling cynical this morning, but I don't know. I think we're giving the Donald, like, we're letting him off the hook with this stupid narrative.
How
and
so?
well, I think the Donald was just always going to do this crazy thing in Iran, and that Venezuela doesn't really have a lot to do with it. I don't know. Like Tucker always defends the Donald's character, I guess, and says that he really didn't want to do this. But I don't know. It doesn't really matter. It matters like what you actually end up doing. And this thing's a complete disaster. And of course, the ceasefire is off with Iran. And it looks like we're gonna be, well, what Professor Zhang said on Piers Morgan's podcast somewhat recently is that we really can't invade Iran in the summer because it is too darn hot. And so as we
Interesting.
go into the winter, you would expect things to escalate. And I guess that's what I would expect as well. And the other
Interesting.
thing is I just don't have I don't know, I don't have any faith in the left to not succumb to like infiltration. I mean, obviously there are
Yeah.
some righteous people on the left, but the left folds like every time. They fold like Superman on Laundry Day. And they just
Superman on
immediately
Laundry Day.
they immediately fall into, I mean, the 99% message was so powerful, and for some reason, I don't know, we just succumb to, I don't know, racial infighting, I guess, or something. We completely lack the ability to stay focused. And yeah, I just don't have any faith whatsoever in the Bernie Sanders and the AOCs. And I don't know, like this whole DSA movement, you would hope is for real. So I guess we'll have to see how it, I don't know. I was just listening to someone on Jimmy Dore's podcast talk about how he doesn't have faith in Mamdani. And so I don't know. I'm extremely cynical about it all, but these things are more like outlets for American theory that they have to keep channeled as best they can. And maybe if there's sufficient outrage, they can only channel that outrage so much towards the sources that they would like, and so that we should be pretty happy about people like Zoran Mamdani. But man, it just I don't know. The left folds, man, is what it is.
Well, yeah, I agree. It does seem like like you said it during the Occupy Wall Street era, there was quite the solidarity among the 99%, and a lot of antipathy towards the financial elite who had received economic bailouts from the government of historic proportions. And it does seem like that message was lost in the woke movement, or a retreat into uh, emphasis on identity rather than solidarity, and that's very divisive, and it's just completely collapsed the
It's
left.
looks completely counterintuitive. It's just an absolute failure. Yeah,
Yeah,
to descend into identism rather than solidarity. That is a great way to phrase it.
yeah.
And to be clear, I mean the right folds too. I mean the right primary Thomas Massey. You have got to be kidding me. I mean just a catastrophic failure, and it really shows the extent of our damnation, I think.
Yeah, the underlying issue, I think, is that both wings of our bicameral, bicameral refers to like a legislature that's split into like a House of Representatives and the Senate. But I mean, like the way that our politics is divided into two parties and limited to two parties, like the duopoly, let's call it. The two-party duopoly seems like both wings of the two-party duopoly are equally beholden to, wealthy donors, and that's why we can't get the sorts of Medicare for all or an end to ridiculous foreign entanglements militarily that the American people desperately need. And so I think that the problem really is boils down to the two-party duopoly being wholly captured by the donor class, the rentier class, the folks who make their money by owning assets versus actually rolling up their sleeves and going to work. That class seems like they've thoroughly corrupted the political process. But man, it seems like that is a precarious status quo for them to maintain, right? It requires that we all take the people who are whose faces are beamed into our homes in the news and the media, and also in movies and television shows. It like requires that we allow those talking heads to define reality for us. And I'm just wondering if maybe the rise of the DSA candidates, sponsored by the aforementioned Mr. Mamdani, in places like New York and Colorado recently over the past few weeks, really shows that the attempt to divide the working class against itself to prevent any kind of to prevent the kind of economic remedies needed to arrest the stalling and failing of the U.S. economy. It seems like it just seems like maybe they won't be able to keep us divided for much longer. I definitely feel as though the woke fever that so many of us got swept up in the 2010s. It seems like that tide has broken, like that fever has broken, and I wonder, like, as living standards collapse and more and more and more young people can't afford homes or family formation, if maybe we're reaching a phase of economic degradation that is quite beyond the ability of the propaganda machines funded that fund that the same nefarious group of well-heeled donors who fund the two parties also funds the media. I'm just wondering if it's beyond their ability to spin a narrative. So, well, I do agree that the Democratic Party, the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, but in our case, more tragically, the Democratic Party has been completely co-opted and captured and utterly unresponsive to the actual needs of its constituents over the past, let's say, 20, 30, 40 years. I just don't think the Democrats have any way to ever be successful without actually. They're not going to be able to do another Obama administration where they can bail out the bankers, engage in more foreign wars, drone kill American citizens extrajudicially, turn Syria and Libya into zones of chaos. I just don't think that the Democrats are going to be able to reach back into their hat and pull out that rabbit again. They're not going to be able to go back to that playbook, just because the reality is just too obvious and in everyone's face now. So I feel optimistic, Brian, to match your pessimism. I feel optimistic, but not because of any competence on the Democratic side. I just think that they've reached the end of their playbook, and they're just not going to be relevant if they cannot. They can't move forward on the economic front. I don't know, but man, I hope that I'm right and you're not right, Brian. But I wonder if you're right and I'm not right. I worry that you might be right in this one.
Well, the problem is they can, come up with novel ways to, redivide the previously unified electorate. Um, and so, I mean, well, like Donald Trump is like somehow like a bigger existential threat than like George Bush to like, your average suburban, Democratic soccer mom voter. It seems anyway. And then I don't know, there's other things too, like the infiltration of social media into our lives, and now AI, and
Mhm.
I don't know. I mean, I think it's clear that the political sort of energy is there, if it can, remain, focused, and not come crashing down like the Tower of Babel. Yeah.
Well, I think we gotta, migrate to the topic of the fate of Mr. Graham Platner as a Mainer still, and you a Mainer until recently, Brian. That does really figure into this thing, and well, to be honest, the recent fate of Mr. Platner has made me despair a little bit that maybe the sophistication of the average Democratic voter is not where I was hoping it would be about 3.5 minutes ago when I was talking about, overcoming, or where I was talking about narratives from the establishment no longer being sufficient to contain populist discontent, because they certainly seem to be able to assassinate Mr. Platner and remove him from the main Senate race, something that might have actually affected the balance of power in the Senate, unlike the deaths or illnesses of Messieurs Graham and McConnell. Uh, I mean, I do feel like we are gonna reelect Susan Collins, the erstwhile Republican senator from Maine that virtually everyone hates, but like what you're saying, the Democrats can't stop assassinating their own people, and that seems to be, in my view, what's happened to Mr. Platner this past week when they finally trotted out some kind of a sexual assault allegation that seems to be sticking this time. What are your thoughts on the matter, Brian? I'm curious to know what your take's going to be.
Let's see. Well, it's a sorry state of affairs. I saw one Substack article that was accusing Ryan Grimm, who was reporting on this matter, on Breaking Points at least, and accusing him basically being a proponent of rape culture. Um, and to me, Ryan's grim reporting just seems like an effort to get the facts. And I guess what was not reported in the Washington Post or whoever kicked this story up, Politico, was some bit about how this lady was saying she needed a glute massage. And then that's what resulted in, I guess, a drunken Mr. Platner showing up at her house. Um, and so, man, well, it seems like Ryan Grimm to me is just going after the facts. You could, I mean, I can see how you could feel like this is supposed to be an attack on the character of the person bringing these allegations to light. But I mean, it's just crazy that Graham Platner here is going to be the target of identifying rape culture, but not like the whole political establishment, which is all tied up in the Epstein files.
Yeah.
And man, it just seems like, I mean, what I would have to predict is that the Epstein files will remain redacted and largely unreleased. And probably like a lot more people are going, like a lot more children are going to die in Gaza because Mr. Platner being out of this race.
Hmm.
I mean, I don't know. I guess what I would predict is that Susan Collins is just going to win. I mean, apparently Troy Jackson, the heir apparent to that Democratic senatorial candidacy, is also against taking APAC dollars and whatnot. But I mean, Susan Collins has been down in the polls before, and I don't know. It seems like this is devastating towards all the energy for a non-establishment left-wing candidate from Maine for that senatorial seat.
Yeah. Yeah, let's see. I think you hit it on the head talking about WAPO there, Washington Post and Politico a moment ago. There was also a CNN interview with Mr. Jake Tapper, and it bears mentioning, Ryan Grimm thought it bore mentioning, and I'm inclined to agree, that this woman did indeed ask for an ass massage from Mr. Platner. And the interesting thing here, that does not mean that Mr. Platner is not guilty of sexual assault. Right? It's not an apology. It's just a fact that colors public perception of the incident in question, which is being pushed as disqualifying for the Senate race. And indeed, Platner agreed to drop out. But the interesting thing here is that neither Politico nor CNN put when the this woman who was, honest about the fact that she had ordered a glute massage, um, it's not her fault. She explained the situation as it was, or as she remembered it. But crucially, Jake Tapper in a CNN interview chose not to ask her about the nature of the messages that she had sent to Platner inviting him over, and Politico omitted the incident entirely. If you were to read the Politico piece only, you might come to the conclusion that Platner like broke into her house or something. It seemed like much more aggressive than it really was if you leave out the fact that she had specifically asked him to come over and rub her bottom. So this fact was reported in the Washington Post piece, and so that really exposes both CNN and Politico as being, in the can, or trying to shape public perception by omitting relevant facts. So it's just noticing that we have a problem of journalistic integrity here is not a defense really of Mr. Platner, and nor is an indictment of the character of this woman, Jean. What was her last name? Rasico, something like this. It's just noticing that the media is trying to push this a certain way, and so that seems to be what we're dealing with here. And I don't know, my mind instantly goes to the 8 women who came forward to accuse Joe Biden of sexual assault, including a certain young woman named Tara Reid, or at least she was a young woman in the 1980s when she says Joe Biden pushed her up against a bookshelf and penetrated her with his hand, while holding her down, like a violent sexual assault. It's fascinating to me that when Joe Biden is running, that these sorts of claims about his character are not relevant, and we just have to vote blue no matter who. But when Mr. Graham Platner, who is vocally opposed to the goings-on in Gaza and demands Medicare for all, the usual Bernie Sanders lineup of, I guess Mr. Sanders, disappointingly, not as vociferous as I'd like him to be on Gaza, but the point stands. It's like a Bernie Sanders-esque economic platform coupled with a protest against the ongoing slaughter in Gaza. And I noticed that when a candidate like that has a questionable story, or at least a story with some gray area, the media chooses not to report that, to paint him as the most evil villain they possibly can, trying to force him out of the Senate race. And the hallowed refrain of vote blue no matter who, which we were inundated with in 2024 and 2020, is suddenly quite silent, and there's no bots on the main subreddit calling for vote blue no matter who. It's just the oddest thing, Brian. I just can't believe it.
Yeah, vote blue no matter who, like not for Graham Platner. But yeah, I don't know. It's a sorry state of affairs, man. Yeah, I mean they I don't know. This business of rape culture is used to pick off weaker candidates, and ultimately just provides cover for the establishment. So it seems.
The same media outlet that reported that reported that the former senior energy advisor to Joe Biden, a certain Amos Hochstein, his testimony that the Biden administration was preparing for war with Iran, right? That was in truthout.org. And there's another lovely article I have here from Truthout, which talks about Politico, the very outlet that chose not to divulge the fact that Graham Platner's accuser had texted him requesting a butt massage. I'm just going to read the headline here from truthout.org, and I'll read the sub-headline too. This will give the flavor. You don't want to have to get into the actual article here, but the headline is, Politico boss reportedly demands allegiance to Israel from editorial staff. And the sub-headline is, the publication's parent company, Axel Springer, considers Israel's right to exist one of its essential values. So Politico, the magazine, is, totally in the tank for Zionist propaganda. And really, the notion that this rag is going to be presenting the kind of impartial journalism we need to make a judgment on the character of Graham Platner is a laughable proposition, to say the least, Brian.
Yeah. Well, this right to exist is like an irritating bit of rhetoricism, I guess.
Yeah.
And I mean, well, food doesn't have a right to exist. Such a stupid phrase. But yeah, man, it's a sorry state of affairs, to be sure.
Yeah. I mean, it is like, it's like, yeah, I mean, I can understand why the Israelis would feel threatened and why they insist on their right to exist. But on the other hand, you've got this whole population of people living within their borders who are completely shorn of anything resembling political rights, right? They can't vote. Their movements are restricted. They're surveilled, and they have no ability to lobby their own government for redress of grievances. And so, I mean, that seems like a human rights violation that to not mention it and to just end the argument at, well, Israel has a right to exist, is like extremely disingenuous and an attempt to shade the situation in a way that makes it seem okay that they've just dispossessed this entire population of people, meaning the Israelis have dispossessed the entire population of Palestinians within their own the confines of their own political borders. So, yeah, dude, it's a really frustrating and sad state of affair. I really have to stay off the Reddit, but in some ways, it's a good way to gauge the pulse of what's going on, but in other ways, it's infested with bots. And after the Graham Platner news broke this week, I made the mistake of going on r/main, and every time one of these political scandals breaks, it really you can just see the bots infesting Reddit, trying to push public opinion. I love the idea that the Graham Platner voters should have known about this. It's all their fault that we have a faulty candidate, and certainly nothing to do with the Democratic Party elite trying to undermine the campaign of Platner. They have the same donors as the Republicans. They would clearly rather have Susan Collins win in November than have a progressive candidate like Graham Platner win under the aegis of the Democratic Party. And I think that was true of the Donald too. I mean, they would rather lose with Joe Biden or Hillary Clinton than win and have the Donald become president than win with Bernie Sanders. And that's because the same people cut the checks to both parties. I mean, there's no getting around it.
Yeah, well, on Tuesday morning, like I believe that was the day the story broke. Like it had already been declared that Graham Plattner was defeated and needs to step down.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
before like 12 o'clock or so, when I don't know, the story really started. Like before there were like headlines on NPR and stuff. It was already declared that Graham Platner was a lame duck on the main subreddit.
yeah.
Yeah.
Man, I wished he would have told him to get bent, and I wished he would have continued his campaign. Even if there was no way to win it, it would still be a symbolic victory against the nefarious forces that govern the Democratic Party. I wished he would have told them to bugger off and said he was contesting these untrue allegations and continuing his campaign, undisturbed, unmolested. That would have been the announcement to make. I wished he would have done that. But I wonder what other forces are at play behind the scenes here. Like this Rasico woman, did she have her family threatened? I mean, is it enough to promise her a massive check in her account, her bank account, to come forward with these allegations that are just perfectly timed to knock out a progressive, a winning progressive candidate for the Senate? It is like. It's just so craven, and it's just so frustrating to see the Reddit astroturf with comments talking past the sale, already saying that Graham Plattner needs to step down. He shouldn't have done it. I wish he would have. I wish he would have stuck it to the man and stayed in the race.
Well, it would have been a good opportunity to at least talk about the Epstein files some more and beat that drum. But to my
Mm-hmm.
knowledge, that did not happen at all. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
that's pretty disappointing. And I guess Graham Plattner, you'd have to say, underestimated the amount of conviction he was going to need to pull this off, which in some ways is disqualifying, I suppose. Yeah, I don't know. You'd think you would have foresaw this kind of thing happening. I don't know if he expected a gilded path to that Senate seat after having won the primary or what. But yeah, I mean, well, one good thing about the Donald is he just shrugs off criticism, at least, good from the perspective of his political ambitions. And
Yeah.
so a little bit of that from Grand Platner would go a long way towards, having less dead children in Gaza.
Yeah, that's right, Brian. That's very smart. I think it's the Donald is he's got no shame for some reason, and that's made him impervious to the usual tricks pulled by the party apparatchiks behind the scenes. Right? The Republicans couldn't dislodge him, whereas Bernie Sanders was easy to dislodge. Right? It was no problem at all. He didn't even make any demands on his way out. He just turned around. He just rolled over and endorsed Hillary Clinton in 2016 and endorsed Joe Biden in 2020 after getting jobbed both times by his own party to such a flagrant extent that we had lawsuits in court dealing in Debbie Wasserman Schultz, the head of the DNC, had to resign in disgrace because they've been cheating so flagrantly. And, it turned out that the Democratic Party had to argue in court that we're a private organization and we have no responsibility to our voters whatsoever. And we can play whatever games we want. It's not illegal. Maybe it's dirty and unseemly, and it exposes them for being frauds, but it's not like illegal in the black and white judicial sense, because they are a private organization and they don't have any legal responsibility to their voters. And so yeah, it's depressing and frustrating all around, Brian. It really makes me question whether I should be participating in the voting at all. I made a special effort to go out to my local middle school and cast my ballot for Platner in early June, and I'm like, why do I even bother doing this? I mean, the whole ritual of voting, it seems, is nothing more than a trick for manufacturing consent for whatever the fiends in Washington decide to do with our tax dollars, like give massive tax cuts to the wealthy, or engage in foreign wars, or bank bailouts, or what have you, instead of using those funds to build out infrastructure or to pay for everyone's health care, or something actually constructive. So yeah, I don't know. The fate of Mr. Platner really makes me think that I've been a fool all this time, standing in line, waiting to cast my ballot like a good little democratic citizen, and that maybe we should focus on spreading incendiary messages on the airwaves vis-a-vis the Good Old System Failure podcast, and not waste my time down at the local Gore middle school, like I say, standing in line like a chump.
Well, the political situation in America is tricky, to be sure. I mean, if you're too much of a threat to the status quo, you'll just get killed. So,
Yeah.
I don't know, man. It's pretty tricky. We have a long history of assassinations in this country and whatnot. So,
Yeah, this makes me wonder, did they threaten Platner or his family or something like that to secure his willingness to drop out of this race? I don't know. I'm not. It feels like you could not go wrong underestimating how the dirty tricks that the system is willing to resort to propagate itself forward. And by the system, I mean the current neoliberal paradigm of cutting taxes on the wealthy and assuming that will create a trickle-down effect where the rest of the country will benefit from that. We've been waiting for that trickle-down effect for 40 years now. It's obviously not true at all. All that happens when you give rich people extra money is that they buy up extra assets and blow up the asset markets. And how many times we talked about on this podcast, but like assets like classic cars or fine artworks or stocks or real estate. All these things are blown out in value, resulting in record high stock market prices and record high housing costs. But yeah, that neoliberal paradigm of trickle-down economics, which has failed so spectacularly, is the thing we're battling against here. And it just seems like the wealthy elite are determined to press that paradigm forward until the bitter end, when a tiny sliver of society owns the vast majority of wealth. In other words, till we revert to the historical norm, where where a dozen families own everything and everyone else is dirt poor, scratching the surface of the earth for their subsistence. It's like it's like we fought this whole, like the history of Western civilization since the Middle Ages has been this fight to first we have like the Magna Carta, like King John's hand is forced, his signature is forced on the Magna Carta, where he cedes a little bit of his power to the nobility. And then you have the English Bill of Rights, and after the glorious revolution of 1688, the bloodless revolution, where the English installed William and Mary as their new king and queen and ousted the old king and established a Bill of Rights for British citizens. Which is interesting. You mentioned last week, Brian, that was it last week you were talking about it has to have been because it was the 4th of July episode. Were you talking about how you just assumed that because of the way the American Revolution is taught, that the Brits lived in some kind of a slave economy or something like that. But really, like, our Bill of Rights is a ripoff of their Bill of Rights, which comes from the year 1688, when they had the aforementioned glorious revolution. And then, of course, we have the American and French revolutions, as we're talking about, and eventually you break the stranglehold of the nobility over the wealth of Europe, and you get this new and vibrant civilization that kicks off with the fireworks of the Renaissance and carries on right up until the 1980s, when it looks like the flow, the tide reversed itself. Right? We reached high tide, and the tide started flowing back out to sea. More specifically, in the West, like with Margaret Thatcher and with Ronald Reagan, we started dropping the tax rates on the wealthy that had created the relatively egalitarian society that existed in both countries in the aftermath of World War II. And now we're seeing that as growth slows, as the economies of countries like the UK and the US become what we call climaxed ecosystems. That is to say that the economies have expanded robustly during the industrial period, and from the industrial period to the post-war period. Then you start having much more modest economic growth after that. And I think the key measure to pay attention here to is, are the rich are the rentiers, the people that own assets, the rent seekers, instead of the workers, are those people getting richer faster than the economy is growing? If the economy is growing at 5%, it's all well and good for the fortunes of the rich to expand at 5%. That doesn't involve any dispossession of regular Joes like you and me, Brian. But when the economy slows down to 1% and the rich continue to collect their 5%, well, that means dispossession. That means a transfer of assets from regular Joes like you and me, or state, local, municipal, even federal governments. All of that wealth has to come from somewhere if the economy is not expanding at the same rate that the rich are expanding their fortunes. And man, it does seem like we gave it all back starting in the 1980s. Everything that we fought for, from the signing from when King John signed the Magna Carta in the 12th century, right all the way up through the Renaissance and through the 30 Years' War and the Glorious Revolution and the American French Revolutions, right up through the World Wars. It was the 1980s was when we reopened Pandora's box, and we voluntarily gave away the tool, the tool meaning massive, robust wealth taxes, the one tool that we could use to battle against compound interest, which is compound interest is a great tool for modeling the way that seeds of grain multiply themselves when you plant them season after season, or the way that herds of cattle or sheep or pigs multiply themselves, right? An exponential function, in other words. But the problem is, at the extremes of wealth, that exponential function, it's counterintuitive how big it becomes. Like exponential functions have a tail where they explode. It's like that old parable of the Khwarizmian Shah and his chessboard, where he promised some wise guy extracted a promise for the king that if he won the chess match, he would claim a number of grains of rice equal to, you would put one square. There's 64, the chessboard's an 8x8 grid, so there's 64 squares, and so it's 1 grain of rice on the first square, 2 grains of rice on the second square, 4 grains of rice on the third square, 8, 16, 32. But by the time you get to the 64th square, it's more grains of rice there were in the entire kingdom of the Shah, right? That's the old story. I can't remember if it was the Shah or whoever it was, but there's an old parable about this that expresses the lack of intuitive, how it's not easily intuitive how exponential numbers stack up at the extreme ends of the wealth spectrum. And when you think of someone like Elon Musk, with $1 trillion worth of assets, right? He's going to be expanding his wealth, even if he just expanded it like 5% a year. What's 5% of a trillion? Let's have a look here. I'm just going to get the measure. Percent of a trillion. 5% of a trillion is what? One, two, three. Is it $50 billion? Yeah, I think that's right. $50 billion. $500 billion. That's what it is. It's $500 billion a year in assets that Elon Musk gets to claim passively. And that's if he's expanding his portfolio at a very modest rate of 5%. I think that the wealthy usually get professional portfolio managers to explode their portfolio of rates between 10 and 15%. If you allow that to happen, it's like the only thing we have to combat against the cold mathematics of compound interest at extreme scale is like the wealth tax. And we gave it away in the 1980s, and now our entire society is forfeit. It's like try this idea on for size, Brian. I wonder what you think of it. It's like in the 1980s we switched our state religion almost. Like before the 1980s, you weren't like you would still It was like the 1980s was the era of the satanic panic. Do you remember this when people were worried about like like heavy metal music, Brian, and they were worried about like Dungeons and Dragons and stuff like this. People actually worried about that in the 1980s, as you might recall. But I mean, in 2026, it's no big deal to it's no big deal to people affect like people call themselves Satanists almost as a joke. We don't really take it seriously anymore. Um, but but instead, it's like we switched religions, and now we worship what they called in the Bible mammon, right? I think it's Matthew, in the Gospel of Matthew. Jesus says, you cannot worship both God, meaning the Yahweh, the God of the Old Testament, and mammon simultaneously. And so it's like almost like we switched idols somewhere around the 1980s and switched from the worship of the Old Testament Yahweh to this other god Mammon, which is essentially the idea that the logic of the ledger book, the logic of compound interest, is sacrosanct, and that we will not robustly confiscate the extra wealth of the billionaire class. We will instead believe in the sanctity of the ledger book, and instead of invoking the name of Yahweh and calling for in the old times, it was the debt jubilee. That was the circuit breaker that prevented compound interest from consuming entire societies. It was the Romans who pioneered running an economy without the protection, without the without the prophylactic of periodic debt jubilees to reset the scoreboard every once in a while. And of course, the Roman Empire collapsed famously in a debt crisis, and it was Christ who came along as that process began to accelerate to say, yeah, it's you only forgiveness can save you from the apocalypse foretold in the Old Testament. The can save you from damnation. And it does seem like we lost sight of that, and we gave away the power of the people. We gave it away in the 1980s, and we're gonna have a hell of a time getting all the horrors back into Pandora's box. Oh, I don't know. That's a long rant, Brian. What does that make you think of?
Um, I don't know, man. I mean, it seems like our damnation is replete, and there's no escape.
I, w-
Yeah,
I was watching, those Ken Burns documentaries on PBS.
yes.
About 10 years ago or so, he did one on the Dust Bowl, which was a horrifying situation. People don't appreciate the Dust Bowl. It really was a biblical apocalypse. What happened was what happened was in like the in like you got to think like the panhandle of Oklahoma, northeastern New Mexico, southeastern Colorado, northern Texas, southern southwestern Kansas. These regions, they were grasslands, right? They weren't they were prairies. There was like a buffalo grass that grew there and held the soil together. And what happened in the 1920s was that we got a wet period, and there was a lot of rains, and they plowed under huge swaths of this grassland and planted wheat there. Began the practice of monocrop agriculture. But in so doing, they destroyed the soil, which dried out during the drier period of the 1930s and created colossal dust storms that blotted out the sun. Like literally, and they would happen. They would happen like every other day or every third day. Massive dust storms you could see them coming on the horizon, and they would block out entire towns. And like the dust was so fine that you couldn't prevent it from getting in your house. And the dust entered the lungs of the children and gave them that dust bowl pneumonia and killed off everyone's kids. Refugees streamed out of the prairies of the central part of America and headed west, as into refugee camps where John Steinbeck got his start as a journalist. Well, the point is that because of the farming disaster, a lot of those farms got foreclosed on by the banks. And you may remember that the scene in Oh Brother Where Art Thou, Brian, where the three protagonists who are reenacting Homer's Odyssey arrive at cousin Warsh's house, who's like the cousin of one of the characters. And as they're walking up to the house, they get a warning shot in the dust at their feet, and it's Warsh's little kid, and he's got a rifle, and he's like, "Are you fellas from the bank?" Papa says, "I'm to shoot who's ever from the bank." You remember this business, Brian?
Who could forget?
Yeah, it really shows the Depression era folks know the dangers of compound interest and that you can't trust the banks. Were all those folks are dying off now, but they would keep their money in their mattress because they knew that there'd be bank runs and you might not get your money out of the bank when you went to collect it. Well, anyway, how there was an episode, there were famous episodes during the Depression in the Dust Bowl where the bank, obviously your farm gets foreclosed upon. They're going to hold an auction to resell it so the bank can try to recoup some of their losses they made on your loan. And what would happen is all the neighbors would come to the auction and they would take a noose and they'd throw it over the rafters in the barn. And that way, the bankmen who came to run the auction knew that no one was to bid against the original farmer for his own property back. And then anyone putting bids in at the bank auction would be subjected to the wrong end of that noose hanging from the rafters of the barn. And so they literally intimidated people from making bids, and that way the original farmer with a very low bid could get their farm back and have some hope of growing food for their family and becoming self-sufficient again. See, that is the energy we need, right? That is the kind of thing that America is missing, right? That's what happens when you worship Mammon instead of the God of the Old Testament or some other suitable idol, right? It's like they didn't care that the logic of the ledger book said that this person hadn't paid their debts and was therefore their farmland was forfeit, right? They didn't care about that. They took up arms and threatened violence and said, no, we're going to do what is right here, what we know is right, not what the ledger book says we must do, what the logic of the economy says we must do. That's the energy we need if we're ever going to shove all these demons back in the Pandora's box we opened in the 1980s. That's the kind of thing. That's the kind of attitude that I think needs to make a comeback if we're going to save our country and not watch our economy slip into the ninth circle of hell, which is certainly where it's headed at this very moment.
Yeah, man. Well, we've certainly snuffed out that spirit for the most part. It seems.
Yes.
So,
Yeah. I think about you and I like to go follow around the comedian Dave Smith, who's like a libertarian, and his co-host Robbie the Fire there, and those guys just love their libertarian philosophy. But I think what they're missing here is that you know how like physics is different at different scales. At our medium scale, there's a certain set of physics, but if you get really, really small, then gravity stops being like an important force, but like things like surface tension become hugely important. Or if you go to the really large or the really fast, you end up with weird fluctuations in Einstein's relativity. There's just different physics equations depending on what scale we're talking about. Do you know what I'm saying, Brian? Is that well said or clearly stated?
It makes sense to me.
I think the same is true of economics. A lot of those libertarian arguments make a lot of sense. They're right. Taxation is theft, and it is at the point of a gun. And the threat, if you don't pay your taxes, is that people will come and put you in a cage, at gunpoint. They're making great points about that. And I'll even cede to them the marginal value theory. Was the classical capitalists right up through Marx assumed that labor was the source of all economic value. And I think marginal value theory does a good job disproving that. But none of that matters when you talk about wealth in the billions or trillions of dollars. Like people, it's just not intuitive. And the only way that we could prevent the mathematical certainty of disaster is through robust taxes on the wealthy. We have to hammer them with high enough taxes to counteract the exponential increase in income that they are entitled under the rules of compound interest. And in ancient times, compound interest was, like I already said it, but compound interest was used as an excuse to pry away the wealth of all of society and assign it to a tiny number of families. And that's been the historical norm most of the time. And that's what blew up the bubble that was the Roman Empire and its eventual collapse. And like the medieval economic system that replaced the slave society of Rome, well, the medieval system did not collapse under debt, because debt got such a bad name during the fall of Rome that the Roman Catholic Church forbade the taking of it. They said it is against God's will for anyone to take interest on a loan, right? And it really took until the Renaissance, maybe the Crusades were the first glimmers of a revival of economic currents across Europe. And the Knights Templar were instrumental in in, they didn't call it interest per se, but we all know you trade in your gold for a letter of credit, and then you travel to the Holy Land and you trade in your letter of credit for gold again, and then they would charge a little fee, for that service. What do you call it when you change one currency for another? What's the word for that? Why am I blanking on that word? Conversion? Not conversion. Currency conversion? I don't know, but they charged a fee to convert your money into, you would just, exchange rates. That's it. They would just hide a little bit of profit for themselves in the exchange rates, and that allowed them to accrue such wealth that they became a threat to the King Philip IV of England. And the King Philip IV of England got his buddy Pope Clement V to have the first Black Friday in the early 1300s and round up all of the knights and extract confessions of devil worship through torture. But the fall of medieval society, the fall of the medieval feudal society, right, was not a debt collapse. It was again the wealthy trying to take everything from themselves, but it wasn't happening at an exponential scale. So we're 2,000 years removed from the last time this happened, and people just don't understand the danger of compound interest. And I think the fact that debt got such a bad name in the aftermath of the fall of Rome, that for 1,000 years the Roman Catholic Church forbade the taking of any sort of interest, really tells the story. And I think that the debt jubilee demanded by the Old Testament and again by Jesus in the New Testament, people think that he's talking about forgiveness for your sins, but that idea didn't come about till the 4th century in St. Augustine. Jesus literally in his debut sermon in his hometown of Galilee gets up to make his first speech before his peers, unrolls the scroll of Isaiah, which is one of the places in the Old Testament where it's written that you must periodically have the debt jubilee, the debt forgiveness. And he's literally calling for a forgiveness of debts. Well, that's functionally the same thing as a massive wealth tax. It's like you're going to obliterate the assets of the wealthy for the greater good of society. And that's what we need to have again, just like those people who threw the noose over the rafters in the barns of the Dust Bowl to prevent the banks from making back their money on the sale of the farms that people depended upon to feed their families. So, I think that there's that guy in the UK. Have you heard of this guy, Gary Stevenson, Brian? It's a UK podcaster.
Maybe.
He has the Gary's Economics podcast, and he's always advocating for wealth taxes. He's a guy that he graduated from college in 2008 and made a fortune as a trader for Citibank, I think, and then felt so bad about making millions of dollars as a trader for Citibank that he quit his job and made his life about going on YouTube and banging on about the importance of a wealth tax. And that guy he's really the best arguer for this idea that I know of. So yeah. Anyway, this subject is of such interest to me. I mean, I was really like, we grew up as Baha'is, Brian, in the this independent world religion that comes out of the 1800s. And then I kind of rejected that in my 20s and became an atheist, and I couldn't understand why. I just like, well, there's not a lot of evidence for all the things written here. The atheist worldview is much more evidence-based or much more rational, it seemed like. But then I started learning about Jungian psychology and archetypes, and I came to regard the Bible not as a literal description of someone's life or real events, but as an archetypically true document, like a magic book. The occult in which I have a Bible right here. Hang on, I'm gonna hold it up. I got a copy of the Bible here that looks appropriately magic, but the occult always treats books and magic words with veneration, because they really are powerful. And it was all well and good. Hearing Jordan P. Peterson talking about the archetypical nature of Scripture was a revelation for sure. But man, dude, I'd never expected to find my own life reflected in the pages of the Bibles. It reflected in the page of the Bible so vividly and with such clarity. Because my story is a student loan sob story of being plunged into debt for my entire adult life. I've never had a net worth above $0. I've been paying off student loans I've never had a late payment, but it's been a brutal slog. It cost me like everything, that I had planned my life to be in order to pay off these debts. And to open the Bible and to realize that Jesus is literally talking about the dangers of compound interest, and then how without the Jubilee year, without periodic debt forgivenesses, that the logic of compound interest will award all the assets of society to a tiny sliver of our population. I mean, that I'm like living out that reality now. Like all the assets, all the things I would have done with my life have gone to paying off this compound interest instead of instead of me using them to create the life I would have liked for myself. It's incredible to see, like, when we say that the Bible is like a key that fits many locks, right? Rather, like, the biography of Abraham Lincoln is a key that just fits one lock. It's a 1-to-1 key to lock ratio. It's a literal story that's literally true. The Bible's a story is not literally true, but it's archetypically true, and so therefore it's a key that fits many locks. And so I just was amazed when the key of the Bible slipped effortlessly into the lock of my life story, and I was like, man, this thing really reflects what I'm living out with a shocking degree of fidelity. So anyway, that was real. That's really an interesting. That was really an interesting revelation for yours truly. I'll never quite get over the shock of realizing that we do indeed have a magical book here, like a document. Like it's just like the occult practices say, like the old stories of witchcraft say. The book is a common artifact. Witches always have some book they're reading out of in occult iconography. Like for example, Hocus Pocus from 1992. Those three broads. Of course they have a magic book they carry with them everywhere. And I was just astounded by that realization. Ugh.
Well, to be fair to our libertarian friends at the top of your spiel there, well, I mean, I think that, like, Dave Smith imagined the government that doesn't, loot the electorate to, send their money to like foreign wars and whatnot and all manner of corrupt endeavor. And I mean, the problem is though, is that, you have people who amount sufficient wealth and are therefore able to exact their interest upon the government.
Hmm.
And then, well, the critique of, like, I think obviously taxation on the rich is like a no-brainer, but how do you have a sufficiently powerful apparatus to exact that taxation where, I don't know, well, they can do so in an uncorrupt way? I mean, if you just have sufficient wealth accumulation, you're just going to have people who get to, yeah, exact their designs on the government. But, so I guess that's, therein lies the trouble. And of course, that's why I am pro-transparency as a fundamental value to try to get to the bottom of all this. But yeah, man, I mean, we are still like wrestling with the message of the Bible some 2,000 years later. And so it would be nice to move on to like new philosophical and existential questions. But unfortunately, we have not learned our lesson, and we are still fighting this battle, some number of millennia later.
I think if Gary were here with his ridiculous East London Cockney accent, he would say something like, if you want to find a bad example of wealth tax, you will find it. In other words, like the history of aviation is replete with stories of badly designed aircraft that didn't do so well. They crashed, or they didn't. There was something wrong with it. They were inoperable for some reason. But that doesn't mean that we should fling away the entire discipline, of aerospace engineering. Right? It's like we need to design there is no alternative to designing a wealth tax that is effective. Right? It's either that or our entire civilization is forfeit. There is no middle to this road. And so, yes, it is true that the rich are always corrupting attempts to implement a wealth tax, and that they'll often, lobby our representatives to get loopholes put in the wealth tax so that it doesn't work. But if we don't dispossess the wealth, the ultra, like if we don't relieve them of the hoarded wealth that they can never spend on them or their kids, if we don't do that, then all of our assets will eventually be under the control of a tiny minority among us, a tiny sliver of society. And there'll be no inheriting your parents' house, right? Everything will be massively expensive, and you'll have to go into debt for healthcare or for education. It's already happening, or to own a home, like just massive debt to the wealthy. And there's just only so much of our productive capacity that we can sacrifice to the cumulative, the compound interest based claims of these billionaires. before it will just make society unlivable for the rest of us. We must resist the designs of the ultra wealthy to return us to a feudal state where 2 or 3 rich families own everything and everyone else scratches the surface of the land for their subsistence, like the peasant farmers or the serf farmers of the Middle Ages. And so, yeah, I don't know. There is no mathematical alternative in my mind. Libertarian theory, their idea is that, like, if you just had sound money, then the wealthy, if I could strongman their case, this is what I would say. If you didn't, like, the wealthy are having their returns on investment blown out by the central bank, which is printing crazy amounts of money and bailing them out of their bad investments, which is true. The central bank certainly does turbocharge the dispossession that compound interest forces on the rest of society. But in order to believe in the libertarian utopia, you have to believe that the rich could, if we had sound money, if we just had sound money, the rich could never grow their fortunes faster than the rest of the economy. And I think that that's just obviously disproven by the actual history of the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries, and now the 21st century. The wealthy always have ways to grow their wealth at the rest of our expense. And the idea that the rate of growth of the fortunes of the wealthy and the overall economy would be locked in tandem by some magical force if we just had sound money seems even more ludicrous than suggesting that we just need to try a new version of Marxism. You know, it's like that the utopia is just around the corner, right? I mean, you want to talk about a pie in the sky belief system that just wantonly has hope in the that just, let's say, that just has this faith-based proposition that, the rate of investment will all even out if we just had sound money. It just seems bizarre and wholly unbelievable given the actual reality on the ground. I think the problem is that they model the economy as some kind of an ideal free market, but in reality, there's never such thing as an ideal free market. And usually, the mill company the one company that does the lumber milling in your small Maine town is the only employer from hundreds of miles around, and if they close down, then the entire town is screwed. There just aren't that many options for employment. People can't fluidly move from one employment situation to another. In other words, there are practical reasons why the capitalist class is able to help themselves to the rest of our wealth. I don't know. I think what we have to stop doing is we have to start to worship some other ideal than just money, and that does seem to be what's consuming America, the rot from within. It's just like the mammon mentioned in the Bible, which I think mammon was the Old Testament. I think it was like the Hebrew word for just like bank account or something like that, but it became personified as an actual like demon because of the Gospel of Matthew, and then later the Catholic Church would make mammon an actual demon from hell. Man, anyway, I feel like I've been blathering on this whole podcast, Brian. I wonder if you have any other thoughts than those.
Man, I guess that's mostly it.
Yeah. Well, all right. I suppose I can't believe it, but I think this podcast flew by for me faster than any podcast we've done before. Maybe that's just because I talked too much this time around. I can't tell. The listeners will have to be the final judges of that. But we are already out of time here, Brian, and we didn't get to half the topics that we had picked out for the day. But I mean, how often does that happen to us? We get lost in conversation and we never make it to half things we were supposed to talk about on the good old System Failure podcast.
Most of the time, I'd say it happens.
Most of the time. All right. Well, I will take this opportunity then to bid all of you out there in podcast land to pay us a little visit over at systemfailure.org. There you can sign up to read the weekly essays written by yours truly and have them delivered each and every Sunday morning right there in your email inbox. And furthermore, if you want to get in touch with Brian or myself and let us know why we are stark raving mad for advocating for wealth taxes or for worshiping the God of the Old and New Testament and not the evil demon Mammon, well, you can accomplish that over on the About page simply by clicking on the appropriate name. Alrighty, folks. Well, we will be back next week, of course, with another regularly scheduled edition of the Good Old System Failure podcast. Can't wait to talk to you all then. But in the meantime, please have a great week.
All right. See you, folks.